Aloha. Thank you for joining us here at truthmadeeasy.com as we continue with our Apologetics Made Easy video training course. In this video, the Cosmological Argument Part 1, the Surfboard and the Universe, will begin to uncover clues about the universe's age and origin, which will later help us in our quest to prove the existence of God. We're continuing with our 5-point hand illustration here on point 1, proving that God exists. In our last video on cause and effect, we talked about one of the major challenges used against the existence of God. Some say, since we can't see God, he must not exist. As we pointed out, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity all teach that God is immaterial. He's invisible to the human eye. But just because we can't see God doesn't mean he doesn't exist. There are other invisible things that we can't see, yet we know that they exist. We discover their existence using the principle of cause and effect. We talked about cause and effect in our last video as we looked at two examples, wind and Wi-Fi. Even though we can't see wind or Wi-Fi, we can see their effects. With wind, we see its effect on trees as branches bend. With Wi-Fi, we see streaming video and other transmitted data on the screen of a mobile device. We then asked the question, are there any supernatural effects that point to a supernatural being such as God, where God is the cause and something is the effect? And we saw that Albert Einstein thought that the universe appeared to be one giant effect that pointed to God as the cause. You see, up until the early 1900s and the time of Einstein, many scientists believed in an eternal universe, a universe that did not have a beginning. But when Einstein discovered general relativity, things began to change. Why? Well, because his theory would turn out to mean that the universe was not eternal. Instead, it had a beginning. Einstein called his discovery irritating. Now, why would he react this way? Well, it appears that Einstein concluded that God was the cause of the universe. And as Norm Geisler and Frank Turek point out in their book, he, referring to Einstein, wanted the universe to be self-existent, not reliant on any outside cause. But the universe appeared to be one giant effect, and they add, Einstein said he wanted to know how God created the world. I'm not interested in this or that phenomenon, in the spectrum of this or that element. I want to know his thought. The rest are details. Well, what makes Einstein's theory of general relativity so special is that it supports one of the oldest arguments for the existence of God, an argument known as the cosmological argument. In a trial, attorneys present arguments to support their case. Well, in this course, we'll be focusing on 3 arguments to support the case for the existence of God. The first is the cosmological argument, the second the teleological argument, and the third the moral law argument. In the text we're using for this course, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist. They cover these arguments in detail. However, in the interest of time, we're just going to cover some of the basic points in this video course. Here in this slide, I've simplified the arguments as follows. For the cosmological argument, if the universe had a beginning, it had to have a beginner. The teleological argument tells us that both the universe and life show evidence of design. If they have been designed, they had to have a designer. Lastly, the moral law argument tells us that since we all have a moral law within our hearts, some call it conscience, that enables us to know right from wrong, someone must have put it there. There must be a moral lawgiver. By the way, the different icons you see of the surfboard, space shuttle, heart, and so on, they'll make more sense as we go through our videos and will help you to remember the lessons we learned for each of these 3 arguments. We're going to begin now with the cosmological argument. Don't let the word cosmological throw you. It comes from the word cosmos, which means world or universe. The cosmological argument presents the case for the existence of God as it relates to the beginning of the universe. Again, the main point of the argument is that the universe had a beginning, and if it had a beginning, something or someone must have caused it to begin. Think about it. What being is out there that is able to create this amazing universe of ours that spans 90 billion light years from end to end, has billions and billions of galaxies and stars, an astronomical number of planets, and contains so many life forms here on planet Earth? What being is so incredibly powerful and supremely intelligent to be able to cause a universe such as this to come into existence? Well, as we go through our videos, we will conclude that this being is none other than the God of the Bible, the beginner, designer, and moral lawgiver. Now, the formal cosmological argument is actually quite simple. Everything that had a beginning had to have a cause. We already know this from science class. Number 2, the universe had a beginning. We'll be studying the evidence for this. And 3, the universe had a cause, or as I've added here, a beginner. To simplify the understanding of the cosmological argument, we will use an analogy and compare the similarities of the universe and a surfboard. Now you're probably wondering, what the heck does a surfboard have to do with proving that God exists? Well, let's find out. We'll begin by asking, how old is this surfboard? Either this surfboard is eternal, it's existed forever and is infinitely old, or it had a beginning at some point in the past. That makes sense, right? Those are really the only two options out there. Look around you. Everything you see is either eternal, infinitely old, or it had a beginning at some point in the past. Now, if the surfboard had a beginning, something must have caused it to begin. It had to have a beginner. So what's your guess? Looking at this surfboard, would you say that the surfboard is infinitely old, a surfboard that has been in existence forever? Or would you say that the surfboard had a beginning at some point in time? Well, common sense tells us that if the surfboard was eternal, it would be dust or vaporized into nothing by now. But the surfboard looks shiny and new. It's not dust, so it must have had a beginning. And if it had a beginning, something or someone must have caused it to begin. Now let's look at our universe and ask the same question. How old is the universe? Either the universe is eternal, infinitely old, or it had a beginning at some point in the past. If it had a beginning, something must have caused it to begin. It had a beginner. So how do we determine if the universe had a beginning or not? Well, we can't just look at it like we did with the surfboard and tell if it's eternal or if it had a beginning. Instead, we need to look to science and what is known as the Big Bang fireball explosion. From the Big Bang, we will begin to uncover clues about the universe's age and origin. What we'll discover is that the universe did indeed have a beginning, and we'll get to that in our next video. But before we get to that, let's take a quick look at a few slides here and talk about some of the challenges that some of the kids are facing today in the schools. There are kids today in school that are confused about what they're learning in science class and what they read in their Bible about the origin of the universe and living things. The reason for the confusion is that in some, not all, but in some schools, it is taught that God had no part in the creation of the universe. They teach instead that the first life here on planet Earth spontaneously generated from non-living chemicals in a warm pond on the very early Earth. That's the result of what? Nature and natural forces at work. And from that first life evolved all the other forms of biological life that we see here on our planet today, through the process of what they call natural selection. As a result of this type of teaching, some kids feel like they have to choose between science or the Bible. But as we'll see, for the Christian, it's not science or the Bible, it's science and the Bible. Now I need to qualify that statement. When I say science, I mean good science and the Bible. There is good science and there is bad science. Good science, as we'll see in future videos, is not biased. It doesn't rule out God, intelligence, or the supernatural in advance. Good science investigates all evidence and all causes, whether they be natural or intelligent, and follows the evidence wherever it leads. Einstein put it well, science without religion is lame. Religion without science is blind. We agree with Einstein. Christianity and science go together hand in hand. In fact, we're going to see in future videos that science itself can be used in part, to prove, among other things, that God exists. That it was indeed God who created the universe, and it was God who created the earth and all living things. I should point out here that we'll have some bonus videos for you just on the topic of evolution. That's coming up at the end of the course, where we'll study the many weaknesses of Darwinistic evolution and natural selection that kids are being taught in many of our schools and universities. I encourage you to check those out and watch it with your kids or others you know who have questions about evolution. We'll get to these evolution videos after we've completed the 5 points from our hand illustration here: God exists, miracles, the New Testament, and so on. As I mentioned, the Big Bang fireball explosion evidence is coming up next, where we'll discover some amazing things about the beginning of our universe, the galaxies, planets, and stars, and answer the question, is the universe eternal, or did it have a beginning? The answer will help us to uncover clues about the universe's age and origin, which in turn will help us to later prove that God exists. That's next in our video, The Cosmological Argument, Part 2, The Big Bang.